Gunnison Copper just achieved a major milestone. They officially started producing copper cathode at their Johnson Camp mine in Arizona, making them America's newest copper producer. We're joined by Craig Hallworth of Gunnison today to discuss what's next for our domestic copper supply. Craig, you've just started copper production at Johnson Camp, as mentioned, ahead of schedule. Walk us through what the milestone means for the company and as well for American copper supply at a whole.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much. It's great to be here. You know, I love your program, your channel, and I just want to first thank everyone who's listening today for coming to listen about Gunnison Copper. You know, we're really excited about our Johnson Camp mine. This is the mine that we've been building with our partner Newton LLC, which is a subsidiary of Rio Tinto. We've been building it over the past year. You know, we started off with essentially, raw desert, at our Johnson campsite. And we built an 8 million square foot leach pad. We're going to be showcasing not only the Johnson Camp oxide ore, right, which is something that's being processed with traditional technology, but we're also very excited and fortunate to be the first ever demonstration of the Newton process. This is a new technology that will be able to leach sulfide ore, something that's never been able to have been done before. This leaching technology, it's going to completely replace the smelter and refinery that's been needed up till now to process sulfide ore. So we're really excited to demonstrate that. And we've shown that, we can construct and put into operation a mine. Rachel, when this mine was first constructed in the 1970s, it actually was one of the very first to demonstrate SXEW technology, which is the technology that can leach oxide ore and make it into finished copper on the site. And that's really important to us as a company. Gunnison Copper, we're very committed to producing a finished copper here on the site in Arizona. That's important today, right? The country as a whole, the president, the government, everyone is coming together to increase domestic production across the different supply chains, right? Whether it's energy, defense, manufacturing, there's a big push all across the country to make more things here in the United States to provide for our security of our supply chains. And copper is a huge part of that. It's a raw material that's used in just about everything that conducts electricity. It's used across the board in computers, electronics, defense, satellites, you name it. And take a look at what's happening with artificial intelligence, Rachel. This is just incredible what's happening. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of copper that goes into that because it's all backed by data centers. And those are just dense clusters of electronics, lots of copper. It's something like 27 tons of copper in every megawatt of applied energy to a data center. So a single big data center could use like 1 or 2 million pounds of copper. And you multiply that, look at this Stargate program, $500 billion budget. That's an open AI thing that they're doing. They're going to be building that across the country. So there's going to be so many data centers, and we're going to need a lot of copper to build those and make sure the United States stays the number one in artificial intelligence. So to bring it back to our company, Johnson Camp, we produce the finished copper here in the country, and it's going to go right into the supply chains that are going to build things like these data centers for artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Well, as important as 100% made in America copper is important for Gunnison, let's talk about in practical terms what it means for your customers, pricing compared to imported copper.
We've seen supply chain disruptions, right? This is something that really came to all of our attentions during the COVID pandemic. You would go online and maybe order something, and it might take 9 months to get to your home. This is with supply chains when things are manufactured overseas. And so I think that's what the government's getting us ready for, right? Is now that we know that supply chain disruptions like that can happen, we need to prepare as a country for future possible disruptions. And the best way to do that is to sort of reshore or onshore or create new production here in the United States. So I don't necessarily think it's a price issue. I think it's a security issue and just getting our supply chains secure so that we're not as dependent on foreign sources. Today, about half of the copper we consume in the United States comes from foreign sources, and the other half is made domestically. So I think we really need to close that gap. We need to close that deficit. And by stimulating, new mines like the Johnson Camp or like our Gunnison project that we'll talk about, I think the government is showing that it's going to stimulate those types of things. to produce more copper domestically. And this technology that we're demonstrating, the Newton sulfide leach, this could go a long way to solving that deficit because, a lot of the sulfide ore, it's made into copper concentrates here in the United States, and then it's shipped overseas for smelting and refining. So we essentially lose control of that copper. With this new technology, with this next wave of sort of sulfide ore projects that's going to be built in the next 2 to 5 years, like our Gunnison project, using technology like that, we could be in a position to really close that supply gap.
Well, yeah, with Gunnison, if we move on here, the PEA on that project shows a 1.3 billion net present value with an IRR of 21%. For investors listening, what would you say makes these economics so compelling in today's market?
So first of all, the Gunnison project, it's got scale. It's 550 million tons at 0.35% total copper grade. That's a grade that's much higher than a lot of the big mines in operation today. If you look at some of the other big open pits that some of our big companies in Arizona that are mining today, they've got grades below 0.3%. And so at a 0.35% total copper grade and 550 million tons, this is a significant deposit. I believe it could produce up to 8% of the country's production when it goes into production. And that could really go a long way to closing the supply gap because the thing about the Gunnison ore body, it's almost entirely oxide copper. And oxide copper is something that uses traditional technology, the SXEW, the heap leach that I mentioned earlier. It uses traditional technology that's been proven over many decades, and it makes the finished copper on site. And I'll just repeat that, makes the finished copper on site. This, again, is the thesis statement here. This is why it's so important, and this is why we're seeing a lot of investor interest. Because not only is our Johnson camp, which went into production last week, the newest copper producer that makes the finished copper on site, but the Gunnison Copper Project, which could supply up to 8% of the country's needs, is also making the finished copper on site. And we're seeing government stimulus, and actually we've received government stimulus. The Department of Energy announced back in January, they were allocating to us $13.9 million of what's called 48C tax credits. These tax credits, I expect to be able to monetize them in Q4 of this year. So we'll be able to take that cash and really put it to use, really, improve the stability of the company and help us to advance the Gunnison Copper Project more quickly.
Well, between Johnson Camp producing now and Gunnison in development here as well, what does exploration upside look like across your district holdings at this time?
So we actually control what we call the Cochise mining district. It's in Cochise County, which is a great county here in southeast Arizona. It's just down the I-10 for about an hour out of Tucson. It's quite a remote location, but we know of today about 12 deposits. So the Gunnison flagship, that's the biggest. Johnson Camp Mine, that's another one. And in addition to that, we know of 10 other known deposits. And these deposits are what's called skarns. And if you know much about geology, if you ask anyone in geology, they'll tell you that skarns form when the earth is forming. They bubble out of giant porphyries. And giant porphyries, if you look at the biggest copper mines in the world, they're all from giant porphyries. So we believe that there is a giant porphyry there, and we've got some geophysical anomalies, some magnetic anomalies that we know about beneath the surface, underneath some of our existing deposits. So I believe, and we believe, that there is a big upside here on exploration. If we can find that porphyry, and if the porphyry is within our zone, and if it's not too deep to mine, that could be a game changer for our company if we can discover that, because the size of a porphyry can lead to the biggest copper mines in the world. And we're talking to some other mining companies such as Rio Tinto about potentially partnering with us in the near future to help us explore the property.
Well, what do you want to leave our viewers with as you go here? I mean, we've got the exploration upside we've just covered. Obviously, Johnson Camp and development is going to be a big focus. But, as we get into the fall, winter of 2025, what do you want people to remember?
I think that we've been really flying under the radar here at Gunnison. I think this is sort of an undiscovered gem to a lot of investors. We had previously pursued the Gunnison deposit as what's called an in situ leaching mine. And if you take a look at our 5-year stock chart, you could see, we were a 200 to 300 million market cap company when we were building previously this in situ leaching mine. Unfortunately, that technology didn't quite work out, and we had to put the mine on care and maintenance, which led to a significant decrease in our stock price. And you can see that in the chart. But starting in 2024, in December, actually, we went to the market because we had finally secured the land we needed to pivot the Gunnison project to a traditional open pit. And we released what's called a PEA, a preliminary economic assessment study, in December of 2024 that showed these robust economics of doing this as an open pit. And people have been saying for a long time, like, why aren't you doing this as an open pit? It's such a great deposit. And we showed that it could have an NPV of 1.3 billion, a 21% IRR, a 4-year payback. So it looks really great. And we said, yes, we know, but we just didn't have the land. So finally, we got the land and we've now pivoted it. It's only been about 8 months since that happened. And so we're just really getting the word out now to all the investors, and it's slowly but surely taking root, and people are starting to understand that, hey, this thing is now a traditional open pit. It's straightforward technology. It's a simple flow sheet. It's going to make the copper in the US. We're going to sell it in the US. So it's a really great deposit. And when you look at the valuation, because of the history, because of that in situ leaching approach and the pivot that was very recent, our valuation, we're trading at about a 0.1 times price to net asset value. And if viewers aren't familiar with that metric, this is a key metric to evaluating this type of company. And typically you'd see this type of company trading at maybe a 0.2 to a 0.4 times, having a PEA level study in open pit. Take a look at our peer group, right? Take a look at the other open pit projects in Arizona. You'll see they're trading at a 0.3 or a 0.4 times. So right there, that implies a significant upside as we're able to really, advance this project and prove it out to the market to be in relative to those peers. We're looking at a 2 or 3 or 4 times upside to get to that relative valuation that we feel that we should be at. So I think that's the main reason. The second reason is the Johnson Camp mine, right? You're getting that exposure. That is something that those other peers don't have. The other peers, they have some good projects too, but no one else has an operating mine that's going to be generating free cash flow and proving out this Newton technology. And then the third reason is, and you touched on this earlier, is exploration upside. So that's something that we've got in spades. And I think if you look at the whole package, it's really an attractive time for investors to get into the stock today.
Well, listen, Craig, this was a great conversation, especially to introduce Gunnison to our audience. We hope to see you for another update as you go.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Great to be here.
That's Craig Hallworth of Gunnison Copper. Tickers are fully below for you to study and understand the company deeper at your own time. Check out CEO.CA to do that. Thanks for watching.